This is WAEC June 2020 General Mathematics Paper 2, and we are answering question number 9, and the question reads to cycle x to x and y leave town q at the same time. Cycle x to x travel at the rate of 5 km per hour, that is the speed, and on bearing 049 degrees. While cycle x to y travel at the rate of 90 km per hour on the bearing 319 degrees. The question asked here is number A. You are asked to illustrate the information here on a diagram. Question number B says, after the two cyclists travel for 2 hours, you are asked to calculate correct to the nearest whole number, Roman 1, the distance between the cyclist X and cyclist Y after they have traveled each for 2 hours. How far apart are they? Roman 2, you are asked to find the bearing of cyclist X from cyclist Y. Then question number C, you asked to find the average speed at which the cyclist X will now get to cyclist Y in 4 hours. So let's attempt to answer this very question to get a solution to the problem. What we do first is to attempt to answer question number A. That is to change all these statements in English form into drawing, into diagram. So the two cyclists started from the same town Q and at the same time. So let me just mark town Q. Now draw the 4 cardinal points and indicate this is the town Q. So cyclists X takes the bearing 049 degrees. So we take the bearing. Remember, bearing is now measured from the north line and move in clockwise direction. So this is the angle 49. So you now draw. This is the direction the cyclist X takes. So now continue. Take the direction that is the bearing of cyclist Y. Cyclist Y take this bearing 319 degrees, taking the angle from the north line and move in clockwise direction 319 will be somewhere here. Then you now draw a line that will now be the direction of cyclist Y. So having done that, you now complete this triangle that is join point X and point Y together to have a complete triangle. So with this, you have answered question number A. Question number B asked that after 2 hours each traveling at those different speeds, 5 km per hour for cyclist X and 9 km per hour for cyclist Y, how far apart will they be? That is the distance from X to Y. And to find this length, we will simply employ the use of cosine rule. So that will now be X squared will now be equals to the distance qx whole squared plus the distance qy whole squared minus 2 times qx times qy multiplied by the cosine of the angle at q, the angle at q meaning the angle at this very point. So our work now reduces to finding the distance qx, the distance qy, and the angle at q. That is the angle inside this triangle at the point q. So starting with the distance qx. Distance qx is the distance traveled by cyclist x. Cyclist x travel at 5 km per hour, the speed, and has been traveling for 2 hours. So we now use the concept of distance, speed, and the time. Distance is given by speed multiplied by time. So you now have 5 as the speed and 2 as the time. So multiplying 5 by 2, that gives answer 10, which means cyclist x after 2 hours must have traveled a distance of 10 kilometers. So the side of the qx of the struggle is now 10 kilometers. Move to the distance qy, distance traveled by cyclist y. Speed is 9 kilometers per hour in the question and has been traveling for 2 hours. So after 2 hours, distance travel would now be equals to the speed multiplied by the time. So you have 9 times 2. That will give answer 18 kilometers per hour. So cyclist y in 2 hours must have traveled a distance of 18 kilometers. So therefore, the distance qy will now be 18. So moving to the angle. The angle at q, already I have part of it here as 49. If I can find this angle beta, look at the angle beta. If I can find this angle beta, beta plus 49 will give the angle at Q inside this triangle. And looking at this 319, if I add with the beta, it will give me a complete angle in a cycle, that is 360, which means the angle beta will now going to be 360 minus 319, which give answer 41. So beta is now 41. Therefore, the angle at Q, which I will now substitute in this my cosine rule, is now going to be 49 plus this beta, which is now 41, and that will give answer 90 degrees. So I can now go back to my cosine rule and substitute. So the distance xy square would now be equals to 10 square, that is for qx square, plus 18 square, that is for qy square, minus 2 times 10 times 18. I replace the qx by 10, replace the qy by 18, multiplied by cos 90. Instead, cos angle at q will now be cos 90 degrees. So 10 square give answer 100. 18 square gives answer 324, and 2 times 10 times 18 times the value of cos 90, which is 0. We now have 360 multiplied by 0. So adding and subtracting correctly gives answer 424. This is the distance xy square. So to get xy, I will now take square root of both sides. So xy will now be equals to square root of 424. Which, if you now use your calculator correctly, gives you answer 20.5912 kilometers. But the question asked is to write your answer this distance to the nearest whole number. So this very distance rounded to the nearest whole number will now be 21 kilometers. So question Roman 1 has now been answered. So move to Roman 2, that we asked to find the bearing of cycle x to x from cycle x to y. That is at the position of cycle x to y. If you are to reach this cycle x, what bearing will you take? So bearing of x from y will now be equals to, if I go back to my drawing, go to y, it is at y that you take the bearing. So you draw the cardinal points there like this. And it is this angle from the north line to the line joining y and x. That very angle is what gives the bearing. So let me call that angle gamma. It is this angle gamma that will now be the bearing of x from y. So our work now reduces to find this very angle gamma. So look at your drawing. What other angles you need to find this gamma in the end? If I call this angle inside the triangle alpha and this very angle outside the triangle between this line theta, look at it. So I let these two angles alpha and theta. If I can find these two angles alpha and theta, I can now use them to find the angle gamma. Because the addition of the three angles gives 180. So therefore, the angle gamma, which is now the bearing, will now be 180 minus the sum of theta and alpha. So let me go back to my drawing, find what will be theta and find what will be my alpha. The angle theta, looking at the drawing, is alternate to the angle beta. Look at it. Angle theta and angle beta are alternate to each other. And alternate angles are equal. We have the angle beta already as 41. Therefore, theta will be equals to beta and will be equals to 41 degrees. And the reason they are alternate angles. So angle theta is now known. Go back to my drawing. What remains is to find angle alpha. The triangle here, remember this angle at Q is 90 degrees. So the triangle is a right angle triangle, which you can now apply your trig ratio. To find this angle alpha, you have the opposite side and you have its adjacent side. So you can now employ the tangent ratio. So tangent of alpha would now be equals to 10 over 18. And dividing 10 by 18 correctly gives answer 0.556. And if you now take the tangent inverse to find the angle alpha, if you do it correctly, you now have alpha equals to 29.06 degrees. So I have the angle alpha and have the angle theta. I can now go ahead and find the bearing of x from y. Substitute theta by 41 and alpha by 29.06. So you now have 180 minus the sum of 41 plus 29.06. So adding and subtracting the sum from 180, if you do it correctly, you now have 110 degrees, rounded to the nearest whole number. This is now the bearing of x from y. And that answered Roman 2 of question number B. So we move to question number C. Number C asks to find the average speed if cyclist X will now move to the position of cyclist Y in 4 hours. That is the time he intended to take in reaching cyclist Y. So what will now be the speed that he must move with? So average speed will now be equals to distance divided by the time. The distance from X to Y we have here as the 21 rounded to the nearest whole number. But it is this value 20.5912 that we rounded. For the sake of this very question, it's better to use the not rounded value so that it may not alter your answer here. So you now use the 20.9512 instead of that 21 divided by 4 hours. When you divide this correctly, you now have 5.15 kilometer per hour. This would now be the speed cyclist X must used in reaching cyclist Y in 4 hours. And that answered all the questions. Let me just share with you quickly the mark distribution for this very question as it is there in the marking scheme. So the very first mark is bonus to 2 marks. This bonus 2 marks is for answering question number A, that is able to write or change this question from statement form into drawing. You have this bonus 2 marks, but all the positions of X, Y, Q must be correctly indicated. The angle 49 and 319 must be correctly indicated. Next marker is another bonus 1 mark for getting either the distance QX as 10 kilometers or the distance QY as 18 kilometers correctly. You have this bonus 1 mark. When you now have the angle alpha, that is attempting to get the alpha using the tangent ratio, you have this method 1 mark. And when you now have the angle alpha correctly as 29.06 degrees, you have this accuracy 1 mark. So next mark is substituting your distance QX, your distance QY, your angle at Q 90 degrees correctly. You have this method 1 mark. When you now simplify and rounded the distance XY, exactly you have it as 21 kilometers. You now have accuracy 1 mark. Attempting to get the bearing by subtracting the angle theta and alpha from 180. This gives you method 1 mark. And when you now substituted your alpha and the theta correctly by 41 and 29.06, you have this method 1 mark. And when you now do the subtraction and the addition correctly, you have this angle 110 as the bearing of X from Y. You have this accuracy 1 mark. Next mark is attempting to get the average speed by dividing the distance XY by 4 hours. You have this method 1 mark. And when you now have the average speed exactly as 5.15 kilometer per hour, you have this accuracy 1 mark. So if everything is correct in this very question, you have 12 good marks.